Alrighty, well, I just watched the finale of Agent Carter, and right away, I will say that I really think this season, hopefully only the first season, because I hope this gets season two, but I'll get to that in a second. I really think this 8 episode run of Agent Carter can be appreciated much more as a whole than it could in individual episodes, because really, in the very sophisticated way that this show went out, or at least this season went out. How they tied everything together, how they resolved a lot of these hanging plot lines, how they brought so much resolution and such a satisfying conclusion to a lot of the arcs that the characters had this season. I was actually really impressed with this finale. Was it as solid as the previous episode? It was about on par, honestly. It was about on par with the previous episode. I'm not going to go out and say, like, oh, this is the episode to end all episodes. No, it's about on par with the previous episode, which, not to undersell it, because the previous episodes did a pretty high bar. So with that being said, the plot of this one is that Professor Ivchenko, I think that's how you say his name, the Russian guy, Ralph Brown's character, he and Dottie are escaping the city, escaping New York with the chemical weapons, except Howard Stark comes back and basically goes to Peggy and the other agents at the SSR and offers himself as bait in order to catch these Leviathan guys. So they come back, take him, and their goal is to really destroy his reputation, because when you actually learn how these Leviathan individuals tie in to the Battle of Finau and how that ties into Howard Stark and what he's done, then you really understand where these guys are coming from, where Ralph Brown's character in particular is coming from. I am going to say that he is the villain of the season. He is the bad guy, as if you couldn't already figure that out. Now, first of all, I think the performances were pretty solid all across the board in this episode. You know, not just from the main stars like Hayley Atwell, who just continues to kill it on this show. She is fantastic. And like I said, I've liked Hayley Atwell as an actress ever since Pillars of the Earth, really. And seeing her finally get the spotlight in something like this really makes me happy. Really hopefully gains her much more recognition, not just in the mainstream, but also possibly in some of the, for lack of a better word, snootier circles with the Oscars and whatnot. But, I'm getting off topic. Hayley Atwell is fantastic. Peggy Carter continues to be the most well-rounded female character that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has had up to this point. And Thompson and Sousa, they didn't get as much material to work with this time around. They were just kind of tagging along. But with that said, their characters were still defined. I do think the other agents at the SSR, Dooley and Thompson and Sousa, have gotten significantly more definition and character and depth to their performances as the season has gone on, versus when it just started, where I couldn't even distinguish between them. And again, that ties into my earlier point of, the whole season of Agent Carter being able to be appreciated much more as a whole, because you see these characters grow. Because with Peggy, you already had a general idea of her personality from Captain America, and even to a certain extent Winter Soldier. So you already had a bit of an idea. Howard Stark, you had a bit of an idea, and Jarvis, considering what he eventually evolves into in the later set Marvel movies with Tony Stark's butler, you could kind of have a general idea of what Jarvis was like. But with that being said, James Darcy is also great in this show. He has great chemistry with Hayley Atwell and with Dominic Cooper. Dominic Cooper comes back. He gives probably his best performance to date as Howard Stark, because this is the deepest that we've ever seen Howard Stark. And Howard Stark I've always liked his character ever since I saw him in Iron Man 2, really, because if you remember, he had that small role in Iron Man 2 where he's played by John Slattery. And the way that they've kind of expanded on his character through Captain America all the way to Agent Carter, not only does it make sense from a character standpoint. Actually, I'll get to I'll get to this in a second. The point is, he is very compelling. We get to see the man behind the genius, as it were. We get to see a guy who has genuine regrets. Almost, I liken this to the sort of Frankenstein character trait where you have this real genius who is very, on a technical level and from a scientific perspective, very, very smart, very bright, clearly the smartest guy in the room. But when it comes to basic ethics and, what's right and what's wrong, then said genius is not nearly as sharp or as bright. And Howard Stark dealing with the subsequent regret to that realization is really what makes his character so interesting, and Dominic Cooper plays that brilliantly. So yeah, the acting is very good, and Bridget Regan, I know I've bashed Scarlett Johansson as the Black Widow, but I'm going to continue to do it because it's fun. And you could call me an internet troll if you want, but I'm calling it like I see it. And as far as I'm concerned, Bridget Regan as the sort of old-timey period Black Widow is much better. They have written a much better Black Widow than Scarlett Johansson has gotten in all of her Marvel cinematic appearances. Now why is that? Well, just the character is more interesting. You can definitely see that she's a great deal more unhinged than Johansson's Black Widow, because she's in this episode, although it was kind of rushed in the end with her kind of, talking trash as she was fighting Peggy. What they've set up basically half the season with her is how she has sort of an identity crisis, how she is so good at espionage, she doesn't really know who she wants to be. So her kind of grappling with her kind of trash talking Peggy and saying, maybe I'll be an SSR agent next. Yeah, you could say that was a little rushed and a little ham-handed in comparison to how well everything else is crafted. But again, the character is interesting enough to where I sort of bought it. And the performance is good enough to where I bought it. Bridget Regan is great. So yeah, all the actors are great. And Ralph Brown. And there's one surprise at the end of the episode. There's a surprise cameo from someone from the Captain America movies. I'm not going to spoil it, but I will say this, and this actually leads me into my next point, in that it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense in terms of setting up future events, while at the same time it was a really nice nod to the first Captain America and also to a certain extent Winter Soldier. Now, you may or may not have guessed who it is, but yeah, really well done cameo. Whoever plays said cameo, I know his name, I'm just trying not to spoil it. He still does a really good job. And yeah, I really like that actor, really like that cameo. Very well done, and they managed to tie it in very good. And speaking of that, on top of crafting a really well told story around the character of Peggy Carter, this show manages, and this episode in particular, serving as the climax of that, actually functions really well as an espionage story, a very compelling espionage story. And I think this kind of goes back to the Marvel name being slapped on this show, this taking place in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think that's both a blessing and a curse, because it's a blessing in that you get the Marvel fans, the legions of Marvel fans at this point, who might watch this show because it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But at the same time, how that could potentially be a curse is that a lot of them might not necessarily know what they're getting into. In that they might be expecting some big budget comic book blockbuster show, like film-worthy blockbuster CGI effects, world-shaking battles every week, and really it's a much smaller story. And that's what has really impressed me, is that they've managed to Marvel has managed to tell a much smaller story while still keeping it interesting. And to a certain extent, it has a lot of the same advantages as Captain America Winter Soldier, in that it's really game-changing from in terms of, changing the status quo and whatnot. And speaking of that, a lot of the plot points are weaved very well into the, I'm sorry if I'm sort of rambling here, but a lot of the plot points are weaved very well into the story to set things up for future events. For instance, For instance, the cameo I was talking about. Considering what we learn in the Winter Soldier, I'm not even sure I'm spoiling. I'm not even sure I'm spoiling anything at this point. But considering what we learn in the Winter Soldier regarding Shield and Hydra, having this cameo in here and tying it in with the character that he is in the scene with, then that actually makes a lot of sense, because he could use this character's unique skill set that he has demonstrated in this show to achieve what he achieved in Captain America Winter Soldier. In addition, really more than a lot of the other episodes in this season, I felt this was very character-driven. This was a very character-driven climax, and I think that was definitely the way to go. Really, Agent Carter, the climax of Agent Carter, the ultimate episode of Agent Carter should be centered around Peggy Carter, and really her grappling with what she's been grappling with from the beginning of the show, in that she really wants Captain America back, and she wants to live up to his legacy. And her essentially accepting the fact that, hey, she has to let him go at the end of this episode, really, really poignant stuff, really emotionally resonant. So, yeah, really enjoyed this finale. Really hope it gets a season 2. Really liking this creative team. It's paced well. The action scenes, or again, what little there are, well done for on a TV budget and on AMC. Or not AMC, ABC. If it was AMC, then it would be a lot more risque. But some of the subject matter that they get away with on this show, I'm still impressed, considering, you know, the Battle of Finau and what Howard Stark created with this particular item. So yeah, watch Agent Carter, and it really does get better as it goes along. And that's not to say that it's not good when it starts, but it starts off very good, and it escalates to great, to the point where, yeah, I'm really hooked for season 2. Because they leave enough things open while at the same time resolving just enough of their primary story arcs. So, to the point where I am very excited to see where they go with a lot of these plot lines in season 2, not just in terms of setting things up for future events, but also in setting up characters and plot threads that we don't see in the future. And I'm wondering what happens to said plot points and characters. You know, what does happen to Peggy in between now and where we see her in Winter Soldier? There is so much material to work with there. So yeah, really, really excited. Really gung-ho about this show. Very enthusiastic, more so than ever. So yeah, great work.